Are we constantly improving our lives because we don't know how to live with peace? Good morning, everybody. My name is Josh. This is Anthony and David. We are part of It's the Good Life podcast, your practical guide to young adulting. And today we're going to be unpacking the concept of contentment. And this is also going to be overshadowed by the concept of complacency. But it's interesting because when I was preparing for this episode, I honestly did not know what contentment really meant. I was like, oh, that must mean like you're happy, right? It's like, oh, you eat a big meal and you're like, oh, I'm content, right? Like I don't need any more, right? But looking a little bit more into like what contentment means, especially within the concept of trying to live a successful, good life, I realized it's a lot more complicated than that. But it's also a lot more powerful than just I'm content, right? So just kind of right off the bat, like what do you guys think about when you hear the word contentment, like related to your own life?
I think the biggest idea, because currently there's just, with my life, I think briefly just been, a lot of navigating. And so I think when I hear the word content, to me it means being confident and appreciating of the circumstances that you're going through, no matter how difficult they might be. And then finding like life satisfaction still out of that. Not trying to necessarily put yourself in a box, but really like look at the box and be like, okay, like I'm sure there might be room to grow, and I'm accepting that, but maybe I'm not where I want to be, but still finding. I think gratitude goes a long way in this content journey for sure. Yeah.
So it sounds like that contentment to you is a satisfaction where you are, like despite your circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the midst of your circumstances,
Right.
less so than it is like sort of intervening in your circumstances. Like I'm good. You're saying like I'm good despite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up that conversation about being content, but then also gratitude, because I feel like it is such a correlation that gets related so tightly. Because when we're grateful for the things we have, then naturally I think we're more content as well. I think for me, when I think about contentment, it naturally brings up that idea that you are in a situation that you have the ability to improve, but you don't necessarily need to. I think that's kind of the premise of contentment, and it's interesting to think about it that way because there's always that option, and you tease that contentment and complacency.
Right.
But in terms of contentment, it's like being okay with kind of where you're at, being happy and satisfied with that too.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of like life's greatest pursuits, I think, is contentment, right? It's like I know a lot of people in my life who are like on the verge of retiring, right?
Yeah.
And they're in that sort of conversation of life of like, I want to just be good. Like they've spent their whole lives, their whole careers building that nest like a squirrel, so that they can lay off on the work and be like, I'm good. I can go on vacations. I can finally do this. I can finally do that. But I think like the core and challenge of contentment is like, why can't I experience that now? Like in the midst of my circumstance, in the midst of working, in the midst of being in relationships, starting families, experiencing life difficulties. But ultimately, to kind of really expand out a bit, I think that really does come from our culture, right? It's like and we've talked about this before, like you are never enough. Like you don't have enough money, you don't have enough things, you don't have the right job, you don't live in the right place, right? And therefore you shouldn't be content because you haven't completed this to-do list of life's objectives, right? I certainly have fed into that before in my own life, especially post-college. But what about you guys? Like, is that something that you've also struggled with, experienced, encountered?
Yeah, I think that's like a general reality that many people face. And when I look at my life, there's been a lot of challenge, just as far as like what housing looks like, just as far as career opportunity of like full-time and part-time employment. And I think being completely honest with myself, the contentment that comes with that is a difficult thing to find in that journey, right? But I always ask myself the question of, like, am I truly content about where I'm at?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always brought me to a very grounded position where I think the idea that I've always been running into, I think as of recently, is like, what grounds me and where am I holding on to?
Oh, that's interesting.
And during that process of contentment, I look to the Lord, and I find that my faith grounds me in making decisions, in being able to have a clear thought process, being able to take a step back and then, walk and take action into whatever it is for job applications, or whether that's, looking at new housing opportunities with random roommates or with friends. And like, this is just like reality, right? But I love the challenge that the question of contentment brings, because I think it asks and begs those questions of, are you fully satisfied with the life that you currently have? And then if not, are we looking at something different, another concept, another term, right? But yeah.
Well, where do you guys think contentment actually comes from? Like, where do you guys draw that from? Because is it, and this is something that we didn't bring up yet, but is it linked to comparison? Because I think there's a certain idea that you were bringing up, David, too, that prompted this idea of how comparison is in some ways linked to contentment, because we intrinsically as humans, I think about how other people's situations compare to our own. And sometimes that can lead to a discontentment because we think that we aren't where they are yet, and we're supposed to be at the same standing, and so therefore I'm behind in life. But I actually came across this really interesting story earlier this week about this girl on social media, and she was sharing about her life, and she was talking about how she lives at home with her parents, and she's like, this is the best ever. She's like, you guys already know, I'm employed, I live with my parents, but I love it. Like, she was like romanticizing her life, and she was like, this is like the dream life. I'm living the dream life. And it's so interesting that I think contentment ties so closely to also our perspective of our current situation. Because if I saw myself in that situation, I think I would in some way struggle to see that, I'm living my best life at the moment. But it's interesting to see that in her case, she saw that as almost like a positive thing. Like, I don't need to work. I can just live at home. And so I think there's so much there, but with comparison and contentment, I feel like there's also a really big link that we haven't really talked about as well.
Well, I wonder even too, like, if they're inversely related, right? Like, as you compare yourself less, you become more content. Like, there's a person that a guy at my church who is probably the most content person I've ever met. And I've actually mentioned him a couple times in this episode. I'm shouting you out, Michael. He has a very simple role in church, which is to like straighten the chairs and vacuum like the sanctuary. Like, that's his role in the church every Sunday. And he does that like amazingly. But he's probably one of the most joyful people I've ever met. And it's like, I think that meeting him and seeing him in his role, similar to that gal, right? Like, his perspective about, he's not comparing what he's doing to what other people. He's like, he's not like, I'm not doing worship, I'm not pastoring, like, therefore my value in this church is any less. Like, God still values me just as much as the people who are doing worship, because I'm honoring him in this way too. And I feel like that's like you said, it's a perspective thing, and it's also the lack of comparison. Which breeds the ability to be content. You know?
I mean, just to dive in a little deeper too, before we resurface here, I think there's also this idea that we often try to chase certain goals in life that aren't necessarily God-given. And I think that's an interesting idea to provoke as well, because how often do we do things for the sake of the approval of others? How often do we do things just to earn a, hey, I'm proud of you? Which is never said from our parents, Like, how often are we doing things that are just in misalignment with who we really are, with who we were created to be? And I think so much of that, I've been listening to this podcast that's, what's his name, Matt? It's called You Are the Niche. I was listening in the car. And it's like, it's been one of my favorite podcasts, actually. I think it's by Matt Goldman or something like that. But yeah, he talks about this idea of like the identity and how our alignment with that, with our God-given identity, is the thing that we should be pursuing. It's not necessarily what the world kind of tells us, and like we're always chasing that thing. But if we all just chose to chase our God-given priorities, our God-given goals, then we would all be, you know, so much more content in life. Because oftentimes we're just chasing things because, you know, other people are, or because other people tell us to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that idea is so interesting.
I wanted to add on to, I guess, the flow of thought that we have going on here, but I was thinking of the quote that comparison is the thief of all joy.
Yes.
And going back to specifically Josh's point, I do think it really comes down to your specific focus of, like, do you care enough to actually compare your life to other people, or are you actually focused more on almost what God has enabled you to just stick to and focus on Him, like on Christ? And ultimately, I say that with confidence, because the reality and truth of what we face, whether we have like long-term goals, short-term goals, I mean, an honest take is that we have a lot of, you know, disruption, and there's a lot of conflict that might come through when we're trying to succeed and reach these goals. But I think the focus is ultimately, like, of course, once again, knowing your what, your why, your how, and then focusing more on that, and then I think bringing more contentment because of that, rather than, oh, I see the focus of my life looking into X person's life, X person's life, Z person's life, Y person's life, and it's like, I think that's why there's a lot of thoughts that kind of come as a melting pot of, okay, am I truly then satisfied with my life now? And you start questioning that contentment almost.
So are you kind of saying that contentment stems from your who, what, when, where, why, like knowing what those are?
I would say there's probably a strong correlation. I mean, I wouldn't say like there's a solid yes or no that I have off the top of my head, but I would believe that there's something that has to do with it for sure. I think knowing clearly your what, where, why, all of your who and whatnot, I think it matters when it comes down to this topic of contentment and like what it means to receive contentment. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to kind of back up even more practically speaking, because I think we've been talking a lot more about like the bigger whys of like what's fueling my ability to be content, or the lack thereof. But I think also talking about like generally where we are in life, like that sort of post-college, mid-20s era, or just anyone really who's kind of pursuing this, I think a lot of this ultimately comes back from when you're kids, right? Like I remember when there was a really interesting experience I had as a kid regarding contentment, which was why I wasn't content as a kid. Was I remember there was this one kid who was, I was in 4th or 5th grade, who was the fastest in our class. And I remember thinking to myself, if only I was that fast, if only I could run as fast as him, I would be good, right? And it was that particular moment where we were doing like a relay race, and I was the person who was last, that I realized, oh man, if I was only that fast, I could be happy in life. And I think that was sort of the beginning of me attaching, like we've talked about, like the lack of achievement in such like a subjective goal as I'm not good enough. I'm not enough in this. I'm not enough in that. I'm not enough in life. But one thing I would be curious to challenge our listeners is it possible to be enough? Is it possible to be enough in your eyes, not necessarily achieving the things that you feel like you should be achieving? And so it's like in our day and age, right? Like especially in our age group, there's so many goals that we're trying to achieve. We're trying to, like I said before, like you're trying to get that job, you're trying to make that money, you're trying to be successful on the internet, like you're trying to do all these things. But like, what if everything fell through? Like, what if you were completely stripped of all successes in your own mind? Would you still able to wake up in the morning and be like, I'm content in life?
Yeah, I think that's the story of Job.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think that's a great question, because I think we do link, and this is a really interesting point, I think. It's like we link so much of our contentment and happiness to our material possessions, to our achievements, to
Right.
the things that we're pursuing.
Yeah.
And it's like in a previous episode we talked about, like when all of that is stripped away, then what?
Yeah.
Like where's our value? Where's our purpose? And where's our contentment?
Right. Have there been moments in your life, and I'm saying this for myself too, where you've experienced something like that, where things have been stripped away, and how did you find joy, contentment in that season?
Yeah, I think the prime example that for me comes to mind is when I was preparing for my competition. Actually,
Oh,
not
literally.
leading up to the point. Yeah, but no one talks about the whole season afterwards, and it's actually called post-show. Well, some people call it like post-show depression. Some people call it, different things. But in a similar way, it's like if you've ever worked really hard at a single goal, and you got there, and then after that, you would have experienced this, that there is this drop-off of, like, what do I do now? Like, I got there, this is it, and I put all my eggs in that basket, it's done, now what? And that was what I was going through, and something that I haven't really talked about a lot is that season afterwards, I was just binge eating. Like, it was not great. And so, like, I understand the struggles of, like, sticking to your diet and all that, and I believe it was somewhere around 25 pounds that I gained in the span of, I think it was like maybe around 2.5 weeks.
Oh.
And that's actually not uncommon for a lot of bodybuilders. You may be surprised to hear that. It's this rebound phase. I won't get like super into it, but your body is just very responsive to food. And so anything you eat, it's just like boom, like you pick up fat really quickly. But going back to the idea of contentment, I think something that comes to mind is that idea, and that story kind of brings up, is the idea that we often like link a contentment to external things
Right.
as opposed to internal things.
As opposed to internal things.
Yeah, and I think that competition was an example of that. I think I was linking it to the medal, I was linking to the process, and as much as I enjoyed the journey, even after that, there was this challenge of, is contentment found in me having the glory of stepping on stage and getting a first place medal, or is it found in the internal, like knowing my identity, knowing who I am, knowing who loves me, who am I rooted in?
Yeah.
And so yeah, that story definitely comes to mind when it comes to seeking contentment, and then not feeling it after the competition, and then refinding it, and refinding God, and recentering myself. So
Yeah. You know what I noticed about something very interesting that you focalized on that I want to give attention to is the internal struggle that you had with trying to pursue contentment, right? Especially given after something that's so external, right? Like it was such an it was such an external show, right? It's such an external journey. People could see the progress that you were making, and you're getting that external validation from something external. But the moment that stopped, like that resource stopped coming in, you're like, whoa. Like you were so discontent that you were trying to fuel your body with sort of, in a sense, like a lesser than version of like that external validation through food, right? And it's like, I can imagine, I myself have binge eat when I'm stressed out, right? Like we're trying to replace it with something that's not as good, right? But it's interesting, like what was the journey, just to dig a little bit deeper, like what was the journey of refinding that contentment? Like what was a turning point for you in that process?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it was the process of hitting rock bottom. Because when you hit that point, some of you guys may know this, you can't go any lower than that. And like as depressing as that sounds, I think there's also hope in understanding that the only way is up. And so at the end of this, as I finish the story, like the end of that season of me binge eating, gaining 25 pounds in the span of 2.5 weeks, and just looking in the mirror and seeing what I did, seeing the results of my actions, seeing the I guess maybe the lack of self-control, or the lack of emotional immaturity, all of that, seeing myself in the mirror and just seeing what was the result of that, and it's just telling myself, I think like this needs to stop. This needs to end. There has to be an end to this because I don't see that this is heading in the right direction. And if I continue down this path, and this is going to sound very similar for any kind of sin that you're in, right? If I continue down this path, I'm going to be in a place that is not going to be very healthy for my future. That God is going to look at and be like, that is not God honoring. And so when I made that kind of thought process and I looked at myself and I picked up all these different pieces that I saw of this broken mirror, and I had them in my hands and I'm like picking this up, and I thought about it, and it was that moment. I think that was the turning point when I hit rock bottom, that I decided that I needed to change. And so it was that day forward that we made. It was not easy, you know. You're gonna hit hiccups and you're gonna go through painful days, and you're gonna, you know, hit rock bottom again, and you're gonna have binge days, but then you have better days. And more, for me, it was just proving to myself again that there's more better days than bad days. And when you start tipping that balance over, you start proving yourself that, hey, like you can do this. Like this is possible. And so you get to that point where, you know, you're like, hey, you know, I think we have something going on. And fast forward to today, I'm about 4 weeks away from doing another competition.
Which is very interesting timing wise,
Which is
because
very interesting.
you're going to be experiencing the same trial afterwards, right? You're going to be in that max cut.
And the interesting thing is, though,
I was like,
the interesting thing is, though, like having gone through that process before,
yeah,
I find that I know what to expect now, and I'm a little bit more, I'm not going to say it's necessarily easier, but I would say that I know that the repercussions that can come from me making the wrong choices.
Yeah.
And so being aware that like self-awareness is something we talk about a lot on this podcast, is something that I'm going into the show with a lot of intention, because I know what happened last time. And I don't want to repeat history. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes. And so,
yeah. Wow.
Ooh, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. No,
Yeah,
that's a word.
Yeah.
No, that's a word. I think in this podcast we've talked a lot about like it's the good life, but we've also I know the listeners have also thought about like what happens when we're not experiencing the good life.
It's the horribly difficult life. That's what we should rename it.
We should just rename this episode. Welcome to the horribly difficult life. But no, it's true though. It's like giving attention to like the parts and the seasons of life that aren't good. You know, I think like gives way and opportunity to talk about how do we, in light of that, pursue the good life. And so thank you for sharing on that. I think it's good.
Well, I want to know from you guys how you guys are able to, because for me, I had to hit rock bottom. But do you think there's a way for you to make that turn before you hit that point? Before there's, you know, because I would much rather not have gained 25 pounds and maybe gain like 10 and then backtracked, because I feel like that took me way farther down the wrong road than I could have.
Yeah, I think there is like to an extent, practically there's probably something that you can do if you're like thinking about the future and you're like, okay, if I keep going down this path, like, you know, I might, you know, obtain 25 pounds. And then I choose now, actually, before I even hit 25 as a mark in weight, I want to hit 10 pounds. And then, like you said, backtrack and go from there. I think there can be a certain amount of power and control that you have over your decisions. But I also think that not everybody has the capability to think of what options and decisions they have, because it can be so difficult for, I think not everyone can be, you know, very self-aware to the point where it's like, oh,
I'm going down the wrong path.
Or like, or, you know, because I think that's part of the journey that you're going on and experiencing, right? And we talk about this in retrospect because we've gone through the experience. But once again, now that we have that experience, we think, I think in a positive light, okay, the potential of going through the possibility again, or through the actuality of like, okay, you know, specifically with like going through the max cut, now I'm going to take these precautions because obviously this experience has happened, right? So then I would want to try to sympathize in thought and idea right now with the people then who have never gone through an experience, but are so cognizant and self-aware to the point where it's like, maybe I do think this is a terrible first-time experience of going down this path, and to this extent, I don't want to keep going down it, so I need to change. You know, and whether that's a sin, whether that's a secret, whether that's a, you know, thing you keep low key, whether that's, you know, an issue or a difficulty or an adversity that you're facing in life, like you fill in the blank, like audience fill in the XYZ for that. But I think that, you know, there's only so much power and control, once again, that you have over being able to see so clearly and then making that decision in confidence, not confidence kept away, but a confidence to strive at eagerly, to either build and, you know, stop yourself from falling into a like hitting wall, or making sure that you have the right decisions so you're not going to the full capacity of what could, you know, totally lead you to like full detriment, right?
Yeah.
And that's just like kind of the thoughts that I was going through in that conversation.
It feels like you're asking a lot bigger of a question, which we may not have to get to in this episode,
Yeah.
which could be a whole different conversation. Is like, are mistakes necessary for growth? Is essentially kind of what you're asking. Or within this context, it's like, do you need to make the wrong moves to then appreciate and value being content where you once were?
Right.
You know, so it's like, let's say, you know, you struggle with pornography or something like that. It's like, do you need to indulge that to then realize how much you don't need it?
Right.
You know,
Right.
I don't think so,
Yeah.
but that's a question, right? Or like with Job, right? Like and that was the question that the Satan was asking God, was like, if I strip this guy of everything that he has, is he still going to be faithful to you?
Right.
Like, does he need to have his life basically destroyed for him to learn to love you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And as you guys know, the outcome of that story, it's like Job experienced the fullness of having his life destroyed, right? But he was still praising God, like even despite that, you know, which basically said no. But, you know, are mistakes some of our greatest teachers? Absolutely. But yeah, it probes an interesting question though. When you really expand out. I guess kind of a third focal point I wanted to get to when it comes to this idea of contentment is we live in like a very digital age. And I can at least speak for myself, but I'm very much overstimulated by everything that we're experiencing, right? But I've also found this is more like practical contentment, right? With doom scrolling, which we've talked about before. Doom scrolling is very interesting because you're being stimulated, but you're not being emotionally met. You're not being spiritually met. When it comes to using social media, do you believe that people should be using social media when they're trying to pursue contentment, or should they completely strip themselves of that if they're trying to pursue contentment? A little more of a controversial question.
Yeah,
Like, is
it's
social
very,
media
it's
good
very direct.
or not?
I like the directness
Yeah.
of that. I mean, I think ultimately with the way that you phrase the question, there is, I have full faith in. I strongly do believe that people who are willing to recognize their patterns and what they go through in their life and whatever decisions and behaviors they go through, there is that power that they have within themselves to say, okay, I need to take a step back and, you know, not engage. So basically disengage.
Yeah.
And
Which we talked about.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of that, answering that question, because, I mean, ultimately we go back to the same concept of what we were running over, and I think just reiterating that fact, I mean, there can be a certain decision that you can make to certainly not allow you to keep going down that same path, right? And so I think it gives me and others and the audience, I think, a sense of hope in the idea that, you know, you don't necessarily have to keep going in a cyclical nature of whatever life might be in order to attain contentment, or not to attain contentment. I think
as self-aware as you can be, there is a gauge, almost like a measurement, that allows you to recognize, and this is what I love so much most about life, is mindfulness and being present. And that can be a whole nother conversation. But my point in that is like, when I am mindful, when I am present, I can focus on what I'm grateful for. That leads me to like gratitude of the now. And ultimately that whole concept of contentment is just like, I'm brought now to appreciate what that is. And I have that right in front of me. Something that I can say thankful for, of like these three things, whether they're materialistic or internal, right? There's so much, once again, value that comes from that. And there was just one quick thing that I wanted to share, actually.
No, I was just going to follow up.
There was a friend that I was having a conversation with, and a very difficult conversation, but it was very much needed. And ultimately, I think he cares so much about, I guess, my particular life, where I was like navigating finances, and he was like, oh yeah, what are the chances that getting a car is more fit for your situation now than for you to, like, you know, get whatever you need? And for me, I thought at this time that getting a new laptop for me was a better investment. And I think what I found difficult about this conversation is we're both meeting at the same level of understanding needs for, like, you know, my specific circumstance and situation, but then we're not necessarily connecting and understanding at the level that we're at. And that's where I was finding a lot of disruption with, like, you're navigating a lot of contentment and potential complacency, you know, if that's a thing. But I think what's super important that I've remembered about this was, how are we defining the contentment on both of our terms? Because when I looked at my specific situation, I was pretty content, and still to this day, I'm very content with the decision that I made in this situation compared to where it's led me. And I don't necessarily have any regrets for it. It's just I'm curious to see where this other friend is coming from in perspective, because I wonder then how this person is defining contentment and why that might be an issue if it is, and then if it isn't, perhaps what wasn't communicated in order to kind of avoid, you know, hitting this wall and with this truck, like running straight into it. You know, was it miscommunication? Was it a lack of being able to be expressive of emotions? Like, I feel strongly this, whether it's anger or holding back or, you know, some type of confusion. I think in any situation, especially with what we've gone through, there's a lot of like, let's be direct about where we're going, and I think it's important to communicate in that aspect. I hope that's tying into ultimately what we're talking about. I know that was a lot.
No. There was one thing that I wanted to focus on that I think that was really what you're trying to say was how everyone's measurement of what contentment is looks differently. Like what Anthony defines in his life as being content could be different than what I define it as, right? But as a result of that, sort of whether we're aware of it or not, we can often compare ourselves to each other, right? And so I see Anthony's life, or he might look at my life and be like, well, he's not doing as much as I'm doing, so I don't know how he could be content in that. You know, like I'm only content if I do this, right? But you're sort of asking this question, I'm hearing you say, is like, what would it look like for us to meet each other where contentment is for each other, right? So it's like, if I was content doing nothing in this life, and that was how I felt content, if you could meet me there, what would it look like for us as friends, right? Like, if in your case with your friend, he came up to you and sees, you know, you're content doing what you were doing and just met you there, what would that look like for you to be supported in that way versus saying, hey, actually, I think it would be more satisfying or you'd be more happy if you did it this way, when that's actually according to his metric of what contentment should look like.
Well said.
Is that what you're saying?
You like hit everything on the on the pin on the board.
And I think this actually gets to kind of a summarization question that I want to challenge you both with, including myself, right? Is if no one could see your life, nobody, if you were on this world entirely on your own, doing your own thing, would you do life any differently? And I think that kind of goes to a core point about contentment that we've been kind of going around this whole episode which is you are enough where you are, which is essentially what contentment is. So yeah, what's that? I think that for me in this point in time, I would confidently say no. I don't think I would do life differently, but I also have not lived that before to know that I would. But I think in this season of time, to be completely transparent, I do rely a lot on external validation for being content where I am. Like, I just took my boards and I passed, which is amazing. But I think that particular experience of taking the boards and freaking out that my entire future depends on the outcome of that exam, as Anthony knows, it made me realize how much I'm dependent on external validation for feeling content. I was like, if I don't pass this exam, my life is over, is what it felt like. Was that the reality? Absolutely not. But it absolutely felt like that. And I was like so stressed and had so much anxiety because I was like, I'm not going to be content if I don't pass. But I think the challenge in that season, that moment, was this. It was, I should be content where I am, despite maybe my life not going how I think it should be going. Right? And this sort of question is, if no one could see your life, would you live differently? Really hones in on that. Is like, if I was on my own and I took this boards exam and I didn't pass, would it really matter? Because no one would see it except me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, if the situation with your life doesn't go well and you were the only person in this world, that was just you, and maybe I would even alter this question. If the only person who could see your life was God, the only person, would you do life any differently?
I think that's what I'm doing now, actually.
Yeah.
I really do think, I strongly believe that, like, because that question, just the gravity carries so much weight, right? And it makes you rethink, like, ultimately, once again, like, you take a big step back and you're looking at the big picture. And I love this a lot because I had a conversation with my mom last night on the phone, and it just led to that same thing. She said, you need to take a step back, look at the big picture, and I know you're going through a lot, and X, Y, Z, and I'm like, thank you so much, Mom, and I love you, I love you a lot. But it answers to that, and I really think that as I'm going through my journey in life, right, not focusing so much on the destination, right, like, sure, we can try to aim for heaven, sure, we can try to aim to be a great Christian or a model, citizen, but I think what's also important, along with achieving those good things, is recognizing, like, ultimately, who are you living for, and I think about that personally because ultimately it goes back to, are you basically living for an audience of all, or are you living for the audience of the one, right? And that's just what plays on loop in my beautiful mind.
Plays on the radio.
Yeah. David FM.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that when we started this conversation off, I actually had a question that I was holding off for until now. I think because I didn't quite have an answer to it. And that question was, how do you find contentment in the suffering? Even when you fail, even if, Josh, you didn't pass your boards, how do you stay content in that?
Yeah.
I think that's like, and when we opened up this conversation, I wasn't really sure about the answer. But I think as we continue to flesh this out more, I think the idea of being in alignment with your drive, your goals, your values kind of comes back into play, because I think about that, and I don't think contentment is necessarily being always happy given any circumstance. Because if you think about it, if you worked really hard towards your NCLEX, your board exam, whatever you're doing, and you failed, I think that's still in alignment with who you are, because you tried your absolute best. You did everything you could to get there. And that's completely in alignment with your goals. You took the NCLEX, that was part of the process, and you did everything you wanted to do.
Yeah.
If you're wanting to be, like David, if you're wanting to be a content creator or whatever, then it's in alignment for you to get the tools that you need to get there. That's completely in alignment with your identity, with where you are. You should be content in that. Absolutely, you're acting according to your contentment. And I think that's why, I think that question about like asking why, like why are you doing this, is like the root of it. And even in the midst of failing the boards, even if you failed to be a content creator, you still acted in alignment with your character, with what you wanted. And so I think the key to, how do you feel content in the midst of suffering is I still go back to the idea of alignment with your drive, with your character, and with those things that you value, because in the midst of suffering, you still can hold contentment in that, because you're still acting in alignment. Because I don't think you would
With your why.
Yes, and
Right.
you wouldn't have done anything differently. You wouldn't have not bought that laptop had you known it didn't work. You wouldn't have not taken the NCLEX had you known you didn't pass.
Yeah.
Because that was the next step you were going to take. And there was no way of you finding out that you couldn't get there if you hadn't just taken that jump, that leap of faith. And so,
Beautiful.
how do you find contentment in suffering? I think it's going back to your drive. I think it's going back to the things that you really care about and value.
Yeah. I mean, I think it also could be summarized. This is actually kind of one of the calls to action in this episode, is asking yourself that question, especially I think this is even more valuable in the midst of suffering, is this question of, what if nothing is missing in my life right now? Right? Right? So it's like, if you're experiencing suffering, there's a reason it's there. There's a reason I would have failed. There's a reason I didn't get that job. There's a reason, there's reason for what's in your life in this moment.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't necessarily make the suffering any better, but it gives reason for it, And there's I know our stories pretty well, but in a sense, go ahead.
No. I'm just, you got me thinking about something.
Yeah, I know.
No, go ahead. No, I want you to finish your thought.
No. But I think that one of the greatest things about faith is it contextualizes our suffering, right?
That's good.
And like in the greatest moments of my own suffering, right? Like our suffering is contextualized by the suffering that Christ experienced before us and on our behalf, right? So it's like any of the worst suffering I've experienced, any of the worst difficulties, Christ experienced it first. And that's what creates so much intimacy with him, because he's like, I've been there before, and you don't have to experience that alone. And he was able to be willing and able to be obedient to what God had called him to, even though it was suffering. You know what I mean? And it's like, what if we in our own lives can hold that same sort of contentment and obedience that Christ held amidst his own suffering? But you have a thought.
No, I'm just soaking in all what you said. That's great. That's really good.
Yeah.
I think just that idea of holding it, I love that. Like, faith contextualizes your suffering.
Yeah.
That's so good. I just want to echo that. I think so much of what we think about in life often isn't as important as we make it to be. And I think really, you're right. I think faith in a lot of ways gives us the ability to understand, to die is to gain. Like, who says that?
Yeah.
And in the suffering that you're in, whether it's in a waiting season like myself of waiting for a certain job position to open up, and exercising patience, exercising, the ability to not get something that I want right now, I think is something that we lack in 2026.
Oh, yeah.
And
For sure.
we don't talk about that a lot, but I think we all have this impatience in us that we just want things now.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to contentment, we also have that same kind of attitude towards it sometimes.
Any last words?
Super good. Probably the last words would be, for me, appreciate the vastness of everything that you experience and find meaning in what those things give you. And I'll keep it vague. Yeah.
I have a word from one of my favorite worship songs. It's called Jireh. I'm sure you've heard it before. In the bridge, the words go, "You are enough, I am enough." And I think that's an interesting calling, because it says it's calling out God's enoughness, right? Like, he is more than enough for anything that we lack in. And his being enough makes us enough. And I think that's a truth that's taken me a lot of years to learn. And I would pray that anyone who doesn't feel like they are bringing enough to the table, that we fortunately are created by a God who has everything already at the table. You just need to show up.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
I think that so much of, oftentimes our contentment is tied to, like we said, our materialistic items or the things, even our reputations, I think, and to some extent is tied to how content we are. We want the people that we respect, we want the people around us to love us, to think highly of us. And in doing that, we act a certain way, we perform a certain way, and we, I think, often go through life with this certain idea that we have people to impress. We have a certain act to play. But I think in the midst of all that, I think in my faith, it's definitely taken me back to realize that God definitely meets us where we're at, no matter if we're broken, no matter if we're broke, no matter if we don't have anything to offer. Like, in our nothingness, there's still grace and there's still love there for us. And just to be content in that in itself, I think, is one of the deepest things that no one can really take away from you, no matter if you stripped away all the things that you own or all your accomplishments. If if we never started this podcast, if I never did a bodybuilding competition, if I never graduated nursing and I was a dropout college student and I went back home and lived with my parents, like that social media girl that I talked about, like, so be it. That was God's plan for me. And at the end of the day, I think I live out that story with grace, with gratitude, but also with, the gratefulness that I'm still alive and that I'm taking care of things as the way that God meant it to be taken care of. And so, yeah, as I reflect on, like, the meaning of contentment to myself, I think that's such a big question that we only try to tackle in this episode, but there's so much depth to it.
Oh, too much.
But next week,
we're going to be talking about some fun things, the sort of the other side of this coin, of this conversation about contentment. But we'll get to that in the next episode.
Yeah, you want to pray us out, Josh?
I'll pray us out. Gracious God, we just come before you today just with a posture of so much gratitude for who you are, that you can bring everything to the table and all we have to do is show up wherever we are. I just thank you for these two wonderful godly men, that we can just engage in conversation about you regarding this topic. And just for anyone who's listening who is feeling like they're not content with where they are in life, I just pray that you would grant them peace and that you would just be close to them such that they can feel that they are more than enough in this season of life. We thank you for this day. Amen.
Amen. And that's going to be episode 14 of season 2. It's kind of crazy that we filmed now. That's going to be 34 episodes.
34 episodes, yeah.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a rating on podcasts or Spotify if you guys use those platforms. It's good. It's the good life. Your practical guide to adulting. We'll see you guys in the next one.